Throughout the centuries, the face and appearance of Jesus have been a subject of fascination, speculation, and devotion worldwide. However, few historical documents have addressed these details with the precision and clarity purportedly offered by the so-called Letter of Pilate. This text, attributed to the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, describes in striking detail the skin color, features, and physical presence of Jesus, leaving an impression that transcends the barriers of time. In this letter, which has become a topic of historical debate and curiosity, Pilate not only recounts his interaction with Jesus, but also elaborates on his perception of this enigmatic figure's appearance. This account not only sheds light on aspects of Jesus' personality and charisma, but also contributes to our understanding of how he was perceived in his historical and cultural context. Join us in this fascinating analysis of a testimony that, if authentic, could offer a unique glimpse into the physical appearance of the most influential man in history. Pilate begins his letter to Emperor Tiberius with the following words: "Greetings, Majesty. The recent events in my province have been so extraordinary that I feel the need to report everything in detail, as I believe these events may influence the future of our nation. It seems that lately all the gods have turned away from us. I'm almost ready to say that it was a cursed day when I assumed Valerius's position in the governance of Judea, for since then my life has been filled with worries and distress. When I arrived in Jerusalem, I took possession of the pretorium and organized a grand banquet. I invited a tetrarch from Galilee, the high priest, and his officials, but at the appointed hour, no one appeared. I considered this an act of disdain for my authority and for the Roman government. Days later, the high priest came to visit me with a serious and hidden demeanor, claiming that his religion forbade him from sitting at a table with Romans, but his expression betrayed the falsehood of his words. Though I accepted his excuse, it was clear to me that he and his followers were opposed to the Romans. I advised the Romans to remain vigilant of the high priests of this land, as they would not hesitate to betray even their own mothers for power and the wealth of conquered cities. Jerusalem is the most difficult to control. The population is so rebellious that I live in constant fear of an uprising. I have few soldiers, hardly a centurion and 100 men under my command. I requested reinforcements from the governor of Syria, but he said he barely had enough troops to defend his own province. Our thirst for expansion seems beyond our capacity to defend what we have conquered. I fear that this may lead to the fall of our government. I have kept my distance from the people, fearing that the priests might influence the rebels, but I have tried to understand the mindset and actions of this people. Among the many rumors I heard, one in particular caught my attention. They spoke of a young man in Galilee who preached a new doctrine in the name of a God who had sent him. At first, I thought he might be inciting the people against us, but I soon realized that was not the case. Jesus of Nazareth seemed more of a friend to the Romans than to the Jews. Once, while passing through the square, I saw a great crowd gathered around a young man leaning against a tree, speaking calmly. I knew it was Jesus, which did not surprise me, given the contrast between him and those listening to him. I did not want to interrupt him with my presence, so I continued on my way, but I asked my secretary to mingle with the crowd and listen to what he was saying. My secretary, Mannio, is the grandson of an ancient conspirator who waited for Catiline in Etruria for many years. He knows Hebrew well, is loyal to me, and has my full trust. When Mannio returned to the pretorium, he told me what Jesus had said. I have never found anything in the works of philosophers that compares to the words of wisdom of Jesus. One of the Jewish rebels, of whom there are many in Jerusalem, asked Jesus if it was right to pay taxes to Caesar. He replied, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." It was that wisdom that made me grant the Nazarene freedom. Even though I had the power to arrest him or exile him, as is the mark of Roman government, Jesus was not an agitator nor a rebel. I offered him my protection, perhaps without him realizing it. Jesus had the freedom to act, speak, meet with the people, choose his disciples, and teach without any orders from me preventing him. If one day, God's forbid, the religion of our ancestors is replaced by that of Jesus, it will be this tolerance that will lead to the fall of Rome, and I, as an unfortunate instrument, will have been a part of what the Jews call providence, and we call fate. That freedom I gave to Jesus troubled the wealthiest and most powerful Jews. Jesus was harsh with them, and for me, that was a reason to let him go free. To the scribes and Pharisees he said, "You are like snakes, you look like painted tombs on the outside, but inside you are full of death." At other times he criticized local traditions, saying that humility was more valuable in the eyes of God than any social status. Almost every day I received complaints in the pretorium about the audacity of Jesus. They warned me that something bad could happen to him, and that Jerusalem had a history of stoning those who called themselves prophets. A call to Caesar was being prepared, but the Senate approved my actions and promised reinforcements after the Persian War. Since I did not have enough troops to contain a rebellion, I decided to take action to restore peace in the city without diminishing myself. I wrote to Jesus, asking him to come to the pretorium for a conversation. He came. You know that being of Spanish and Roman blood, I'm not easily frightened or moved, but when Jesus appeared, I was on my balcony and felt as if my feet were nailed to the marble floor. I trembled completely, like someone guilty, while the Nazarene remained serene with a tranquility that seemed to be the same innocence. When he approached, he stopped, and with a subtle gesture seemed to say, "I am here," without uttering a word. For a long time I stood admiring and impressed by this man, someone our artists could never have imagined when shaping and forming gods and heroes. There was nothing repulsive about him, but still I felt too old and fragile to approach him. "Jesus," I finally said with a wavering voice, "Jesus of Nazareth, in the last 3 years, I have granted you complete freedom of expression, and I do not regret it. Your words are practical and wise. I do not know if you have read Socrates or Plato, but I recognize that the simplicity and majesty of your discourse elevate you far beyond those philosophers. The Emperor is aware of this, and as his representative here, I feel satisfied to have granted you this freedom you so deserve. I must tell you that your words have attracted powerful and deceived enemies. Socrates also had enemies and ended up being their victim. Your enemies, even more enraged, are against you because of the harshness of your words and against me for having allowed you to speak freely. Some even accuse me of conspiring with you to weaken the little civil power that Rome still allows the Hebrews. My recommendation, and not an order, is that you be more careful and moderate in your speeches from now on, considering that your enemies may use pride to incite the ignorant people against you and force me to act according to the law." Jesus calmly responded, "Ruler of the land, your words do not come from true wisdom. Ask Mount Tabor to stop in the middle of the valley, and it will say that it obeys the laws of nature and the Creator God. Only He knows where the waters flow. I tell you the truth, before the rose of Sharon blooms, the blood of the just will be spilled." "Your blood will not be spilled," I replied excitedly. "I consider you more valuable for your wisdom than all those rebellious Pharisees who abuse the freedom the Romans have granted them. They conspire against Caesar and speak ill of him, making the people believe he is a tyrant seeking their destruction. Those ingrates do not realize that sometimes the wolf dresses in sheep's clothing to fulfill his evil purposes. I will protect you from them. My pretorium will be a sacred refuge for you both day and night." Jesus carelessly shook his head and with a calm and serene smile said, "When the time comes, there will be no refuge for the Son of Man, neither on the earth nor beneath it. The true refuge is in the heavens. What was written by the prophets will be fulfilled." I nervously replied, "You are forcing me to turn my request into an order. The safety of this province, which is under my responsibility, requires it. You need to moderate your speeches. Do not disobey this order, otherwise you will ignore the consequences. May happiness accompany you." "Goodbye, Prince of the Earth," Jesus replied. "I did not come into the world to bring unrest, but peace, love, and charity. I was born on the same day that Augustus Caesar brought peace to the Roman Empire. The persecutions do not come from me, but I expect to face them, whether they come from others, in obedience to the will of my Father who showed me the way to follow." Then I controlled my words. "It is not in your power to keep the victim on the altar of atonement." Saying this, Jesus moved away like a luminous shadow behind the curtains of the horizon, which brought me great relief, as his presence was a weight I could not bear. Herod, who governed at that time and was already aging, joined the enemies of Jesus to execute his revenge. If it had depended solely on Herod's will, he would have ordered Jesus' death immediately. However, despite his pride and his royal position, he did not want to do anything that could harm his influence before the Senate, or perhaps like me, he too feared Jesus, but it would not be worthy of a Roman official to admit fear of a Jew. Herod came to visit me at the pretorium, and as he got up to leave after an inconsequential conversation, he asked me what I thought of the Nazarene. I told him that Jesus seemed to me to be one of the great philosophers that, at times, produce a great nation, and that his teachings had nothing to do with political matters. I mentioned that Rome had decided to let him speak freely because his actions did not justify any restriction. Herod gave me a sarcastic smile, and with an ironic bow he bid me farewell. The great Jewish festival of Passover was approaching, and there was an intention to take advantage of the popular fervor that always took hold of the city. Jerusalem was full of a bustling crowd shouting for Jesus' death. My informant said that the temple treasury had been used to bribe the people. The danger was imminent, and a Roman centurion was publicly dishonored. I wrote to the procurator of Syria requesting reinforcements, 100 infantry soldiers and 100 cavalry, but he refused. I found myself isolated with a small group of veterans in a hostile city, insufficient to contain a revolt, and with no alternative but to tolerate the incessant cries of "Crucify him, crucify him." At that moment, 3 great factions united against Jesus: the Herodians, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees. The ambiguous position of the Herodians and Sadducees seemed to have 2 motivations. They hated Jesus, and at the same time they were tired of Roman domination. They never forgave me for entering the holy city with banners displaying the image of the Roman emperor, and despite my grave mistake at that time, for them the sacrilege still seemed unforgivable. Another conflict also grew among them. I had suggested using part of the temple treasury to finance public works, and this proposal was seen by the Pharisees, who were already enemies of Jesus, as unacceptable. They cared little for the government, and held a grudge for the harsh criticisms that the Nazarene had made against them during the last 3 years, in all the places he passed through. In addition to these groups, I still had to deal with the disorderly and irresponsible population, always ready to join a revolt and take advantage of the ensuing chaos. In this situation, Jesus was brought to the high priest and condemned to death. It was then that Caiaphas, the high priest, took a seemingly submissive stance, sending Jesus to me to confirm the sentence and ensure his execution. I replied that, since Jesus was from Galilee, the case should be judged by Herod, and I ordered that he be sent there. Herod, in turn, showing false humility and declaring deference to the representative of Caesar, returned him to me, leaving the responsibility in my hands. Soon, my palace became a besieged fortress, with the number of discontented growing by the moment. Jerusalem was invaded by crowds descending from the mountains of Nazareth. It seemed like all of Judea was gathering in the city. A Gallic seer, who claimed to foresee the future, fell at my feet crying and warned me, "Be careful, do not touch that man because he is holy." Yesterday I saw him in a vision, walking on the waters, flying on the wings of the wind, speaking to the storm and to the fish of the lake, and all obeyed him. I saw the river in Mount Caterina running with blood, the statues of Caesar shedding tears, and the morning sun seemed like a virgin in mourning. If you do not listen to the pleas of your wife, great evil awaits you. Fear the curse of the Roman Senate, fear the thrones of Caesar. At that moment, the marble steps of the palace trembled under the weight of the crowd as they brought Jesus back to me. I went to the courts of justice, surrounded by my guard, and firmly asked the crowd what they wanted. They replied that they wanted Jesus' death. "What is his crime?" I asked. "He blasphemed, prophesied the destruction of the temple, and declared himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews." I responded that Roman justice does not condemn anyone to death for such accusations, but the cries of crucify him," resounded through the furious crowd, shaking the walls of the palace. Among all, the only one who seemed calm was Jesus. After several failed attempts to protect him from the fury of his enemies, I took a measure that seemed the only one capable of saving his life. I suggested, as was customary at that time, to release a prisoner during the festivities, setting Jesus free and letting him go. However, the people insisted that Jesus be crucified. I tried to argue, pointing out that his actions were inconsistent with their own laws. I explained that according to Jewish law, no judge could condemn a defendant to death without first fasting for a whole day, and that the sentence required the consent of the Sanhedrin and the signature of its president. In this court, no criminal execution could occur the same day the sentence was given. On the following day, which would be the day of execution, the Sanhedrin was required to review the entire process. Furthermore, their lord demanded that a man stand at the door of the court holding a flag, while another mounted on horseback nearby announced the name of the condemned, the crime committed, and the name of the witnesses, asking if anyone could testify in his favor. The prisoner on his way to execution had the right to return up to 3 times to present new arguments in his defense. I insisted on these points in the hope of calming them, but the cries of crucify him," continued. I then ordered that Jesus be flogged, thinking that this would suffice, but it only intensified the hatred of the crowd. I called for a basin and washed my hands in front of the furious crowd, stating that, in my judgment, Jesus of Nazareth had done nothing that deserved death. But my words were in vain. The fate of Jesus was already sealed. I had already seen the fury of crowds in civil unrest, but nothing compared to that day. It seemed as if all the spirits from the infernal depths had gathered in Jerusalem. The crowd did not seem to walk, but rather to be dragged and spun like a whirlwind, moving in furious waves from the gates of the pretorium to Mount Zion, with shouts and cries that surpassed any agitation I had witnessed before. Not even in riots in Pannonia or in the Forum had I seen such turmoil. The day slowly darkened, like a winter twilight, reminding me of what happened at the death of Julius Caesar. It was also the Ides of March. I, as governor of a rebellious province, was reclining in a corner of my basilica, watching the gloomy scene as the innocent Nazarene was taken for execution. Everything around me was deserted. Jerusalem had emptied its inhabitants through the funeral gates leading to Jamnia. An air of sadness and desolation filled the atmosphere. My faith joined with Calvary, and the centurion tried to maintain order amid the chaos. I was alone with a weight in my heart that warned me that what was happening there was more a drama of the gods than of men. As the end of the day approached, when Jesus was crucified, the sounds of agony could be heard from Golgotha, carried by the wind as if announcing a suffering never before heard by human ears. Black clouds gathered over the temple and spread throughout the city, covering it like a dark veil with visible signs both in the heavens and on the earth. It is said that Dionysius the Patriarch exclaimed, "Either the Creator is suffering or the universe is collapsing." While these terrifying phenomena occurred, a shaking earthquake struck Lower Egypt, filling everyone with fear and nearly scaring the superstitious Jews to death. Balthazar, an elderly Jewish scholar from Antioch, and a close friend of the Nazarene, was found dead after the earthquake. Whether his death was caused by the fright or by grief, no one knows. Near the first hour of the night, I covered myself with my cloak and descended towards the city in the direction of the gates of Golgotha. The sacrifice had been consummated, and the crowd was returning home, still agitated, but with a somber air of repentance for what they had witnessed. I also saw my small Roman court pass in silence, dejected. The standard-bearer had veiled his insignia with the eagle as a sign of mourning. I heard some of the Jewish soldiers murmur strange words I did not understand, while others spoke of miracles similar to those that the Romans always associated with their gods. At times, groups of men and women would come and look back toward Mount Calvary, as if expecting a new sign. I returned to the pretorium with a heavy heart. As I ascended the stairs still stained with the Nazarene's blood, I noticed an elderly man on his knees in a posture of supplication, surrounded by Romans who were crying. The man threw himself at my feet and sobbed bitterly. Seeing an old man cry is always painful, and my heart, already burdened with sadness, was further moved. We cried together, and it seemed like everyone there, both he and many in the crowd, were on the verge of tears. I had never seen anything like this before. Those who had betrayed, sold, and shouted against him, the same ones who had demanded his crucifixion, vanished like cowards. I was told that these men rinsed their mouths with vinegar in reference to what Jesus had said about the resurrection and the separation of the dead. If this happened, it was there before that immense crowd. "Father," I asked after regaining my composure, "who are you, and what do you want?" "I am Joseph of Arimathea," he replied, "and I come to ask for your permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth." I granted a soldier to take some guards to ensure that the body was not profaned. A few days later, the tomb was found empty, and the disciples began proclaiming that Jesus had risen, just as he had predicted. This caused even more commotion than his own death. I cannot say with certainty what truly happened, but I investigated the matter thoroughly. You can check for yourself and decide if I was wrong at any point, as Herod claims. Joseph used his own tomb to bury Jesus, but whether he knew or planned something regarding the resurrection, I cannot say. The day after the burial, a priest came to the pretorium, concerned that the disciples might steal the body of Jesus to make it seem as though he had risen, just as they believed firmly. I sent him to the captain of the guard, Marcus, ordering that Jewish guards be placed at the tomb, the necessary ones, so that if anything happened, the blame would fall on them and not on the Romans. When the news of the empty tomb spread, my concern grew. I sought Marcus, who told me that he had assigned his lieutenant, Benham, with 100 soldiers to guard the place. He said that Isam and his men were terrified by the events that morning. I called for Isam, who related to me the events as faithfully as possible. He said that near the beginning of the 4th watch, a soft and beautiful light appeared over the tomb. At first, he thought some women had come to embalm the body of Jesus as was customary, but he couldn't understand how they had passed by the guards. While reflecting on this, the whole place was illuminated, and he saw something that seemed like a multitude of the dead in their shrouds, all appearing younger and filled with joy, while celestial music, the most beautiful he had ever heard, resounded in the air. It seemed as though the air was filled with voices praising God. Suddenly the earth began to shake and tremble in such a way that he felt weak, unable to stand, as if the ground was moving beneath his feet, and he completely lost consciousness, not knowing what happened afterward. I asked him what state he was in when he regained consciousness. He said that he was lying on the ground, face down. I questioned if he could have confused the light, thinking it was the dawn from the east. He replied that he initially thought so, but at a short distance it was still very dark, and he remembered that it was too early for the day to begin. I asked if the dizziness could have been caused by standing up too quickly, as that sometimes causes such sensations. He affirmed it wasn't, as he had not slept all night, since the penalty for sleeping while on duty was death. He mentioned that he had allowed some of the soldiers to sleep at that time, and some were still asleep. I asked him how long the scene lasted. He said he wasn't sure, but estimated it lasted nearly an hour until it was covered by the light of day. I asked if he went to the tomb after recovering his senses. He answered no, as he was afraid, and as soon as reinforcements arrived, they all returned to their quarters. I asked if the priests had interrogated him. He confirmed they had, saying that the priests wanted him to claim it had been an earthquake, and that the guards were asleep. They offered him money to say that the disciples had come and stolen the body of Jesus. But he did not see any disciples, and did not know that the body had disappeared until he was told. I inquired about the personal opinion of the priests he had spoken to. He said that some believed Jesus was not an ordinary man, that he was not a human being like others, and that he was not the son of Mary, as it was said, but rather a figure who had been on earth before in the times of Abraham and Lot, and in many other times and places. If the Jewish theory is correct, these conclusions seem to make sense, as they align with what we know about the life of this man. It is widely recognized by both friends and enemies that Jesus appeared to have control over the elements, like a potter with clay in his hands. He transformed water into wine, healed diseases, brought the dead back to life, calmed storms, and even called fish with coins in their mouths. If he could do all of these things and more, as the Jews testify, and it was precisely by doing this that he stirred up so much enmity, it is clear that he was not accused of crimes, of breaking laws, or causing harm to anyone personally. These events are known by thousands, both friends and adversaries. I am inclined to think, as someone already said on the cross, truly, this was the Son of God. Pontius Pilate described Jesus as a figure of remarkable presence, distinct from all others. He noted that Jesus appeared to be of average height, exuding a calm demeanor and a serene presence that naturally captivated those around him. His face radiated kindness and peace, even in moments of great tension, offering an aura of calm that seemed unshakable. It was said that Jesus looked upon people with profound compassion, as though he deeply understood the very essence of each individual. Descriptions of his hair painted an image of soft, flowing locks that fell gracefully over his shoulders, slightly wavy and light brown, or perhaps even blonde, a striking feature among the people of the region. His eyes were among his most compelling traits, often described as deep and penetrating. Accounts varied regarding their color. Some described them as light brown, while others saw hints of blue, but all agreed they conveyed a unique combination of wisdom, kindness, and a quiet firmness that suggested an understanding of life and the human soul. His skin was said to be fair, with a smooth texture reminiscent of someone accustomed to working outdoors, yet retaining a healthy, well-cared-for appearance. His face was described as beautiful, with symmetrical features that inspired trust and reverence. It was not just a face of physical beauty, but one that carried an undeniable authority, gentle, never intimidating. A full, well-groomed beard framed his features, adding an air of maturity and respectability to his appearance. Now, noble sovereign, this account is the most faithful retelling of the events and details I can provide regarding this matter. I have spared no effort to relay everything truthfully, so that you may judge my actions fairly, knowing well the criticisms leveled against me. With assurances of loyalty and respect, I remain your most obedient servant. Thus concludes this narrative, brimming with emotion, reflection, and mystery, echoes of events that continue to captivate and inspire humanity centuries later. If you found this account meaningful, consider sharing it with others. Until next time, dear friends,